Hi guys, I am Susie Donahue. I am an alcoholic.
Nice to see you.
Golly, I was nervous enough, and then he sticks that in front of me. Just all right. Let's just stop for a minute here and just let's bring God here for a second and pause. Come, Holy Spirit. All right. Thank you very much. First, Wallace and Tom and everybody, Fern, everyone that made it possible for me to come. Monica for driving me. Thank goodness, because it was a little crazy when we got on the freeway. It was like raining sideways, and I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be great, on the way down here. But thank goodness I wasn't driving. It's probably a gift that Monica decided to drive for us. But I am definitely an alcoholic. I know that today, and I'm ever so grateful that I found that out in time. Because for a long time, I wanted to blame many other things why my life was, shall I say, a little bit into trouble. I had a little problem growing up. But, my sobriety date is September 29th, 1987. And that is the first day that I really told the truth about myself, that I was powerless over alcohol. My life was unmanageable. And like I said, I'm a part of the No Reservations group. We love the big book. We study it over and over, nice and slow. And it's been a great thing. My home group, we were able to start that group about 9 years ago. And I think Wallace is going to come and speak for us in June. And I love working with other women. Anything to do with Alcoholics Anonymous, I love, and I'm willing to do anything for AA. I've always been that way, and I had sponsorship that literally sponsored me into service. You'll hear about that later on. In the meantime, I just want to tell you that I am so glad to be a part of this. Speaking, you'd think it would be easy for me. I still get nervous. I still have a hard time. I still get my hands a little shaky, and I could barely drink a cup of coffee. But I just want you to know that usually at some point God will kick in here, so I'm hoping for that moment. But what I can tell you, I was part of the CIA. I was Catholic, Irish, and alcoholic. I was raised by great people. I wouldn't have told you that 27 years ago. I would have told you I was raised by animals. I was raised by drunken pigs, and I didn't like my parents, that they were awful. And I had like Velcro right here, that they were terrible people that raised me, and I suffered tremendously as a child. I was psychologically and physically and emotionally abused. And I'm not being funny. I mean, I really, truly believed that I had been so very much damaged by my family, and that was why I drank alcoholically. And I'm not to be funny, I'm very serious. I believe that. And by the grace of God, Alcoholics Anonymous, intensive step work, and really no therapy, and very, very good direction with a sponsor. I don't believe that anymore today. I know today truly that my parents, and both are deceased today, and I can tell you they did drink. There were clinking glasses around my house. My father wore tux and tails, and my mother wore beautiful beaded gowns, and they drank a lot when I was a young kid, and I followed into their footsteps, and I'll leave it at that. I don't have to identify them as an alcoholic today. I don't have to beat them up. I really don't. But I drank alcoholically at 12. This is my story, not theirs. My father drove off a cliff when I was 12 years old, drunk. That's the truth. And what that did for me up to that point as a young girl, I was very involved in my church. I loved God. God loved me. I was going to be an angel or a saint. I didn't know which. But I was planning on one of those two things happening. And my father had a very best friend who was a priest. He came to our house every Sunday night. I loved Father Pockets. He was a wonderful man. He was a good guy. He brought us candy every week. I had a great childhood. I knew who God was. I knew that God loved me. And that was what I had, that identification. I knew that as a young girl. But my parents drank every night. They just did. And by the time I was 12 years old, I thought, what's wrong with this? Just because there's a lot of door slamming and name calling and terrible things that are happening late at night, why can't I drink? What's the big deal? So at 12 years old, I started to drink. And you know what? I had two older brothers, and they had very cute friends. So I went with their very cute friends, and I went and drank 3 Mickey Widemouth beers. And what alcohol did for me that night was like an elixir. It was an immediate effect produced. I suddenly, and it wasn't that I got prettier or taller or skinny, but I just didn't worry about what other people thought. Suddenly I was not self-conscious anymore. Suddenly I could be with cute boys and be fine and be funny and be Susie, and I didn't care what they thought. And that was power for me. That was drinking spirits. It was a spiritual experience to be okay in my own skin. And that was the effect produced for me drinking alcohol. By that night, 3 beers later, I'm vomiting on my shoes. I'm waking up 3 blocks away in a blackout, and my shirt is buttoned kind of funny. That is the telltale story of my alcoholic drinking. I'm a lot of fun. I vomit. I wake up somewhere I shouldn't be, and I've been very friendly with boys. I can tell you that's my entire story drinking. You know, I really don't have to go into detail, and I'm not going to do a fifth step from the podium. My sponsor said that's not appropriate. So what I can tell you, really and truly, is if a doctor had given me today an antibiotic and I vomited profusely and puked on my shoes, I'd call him up and say, "Doctor, that medicine you just gave me, I had an allergic reaction. I just vomited on my shoes." And he'd immediately say, "Stop, don't take that anymore. You're allergic to it." But no, when I vomited on my shoes, I just kept drinking until I stopped vomiting on my shoes, and my body adjusted to that. Little did I know I had an allergy to alcohol. Little did I know that my body adjusted to the alcohol that I continued to put in me from the first day. I drank in a pattern in a matter of weeks from that first night. I was drinking weekends by the time I was 13 years old. Probably 3 days a week by the time I was 14. When my father drove off a cliff that weekend, I was at a baseball game or a football game, and they came down, the family priest was there, my oldest brother, and I immediately thought it had to be my drunk mother, the one that with the real problem. I knew she must have been crazy because she'd already burned on a couch and everything else, had the neighborhood there, the fire department. I figured it had to be her. And when they said, "Your father killed himself," at that moment I immediately blamed God. Immediately, whenever anything doesn't go my way, when things aren't the way I want them to be, when the one thing that I loved the most, which was my father, I immediately took God and said, "You're at fault. You're the one that killed my father. You did it. I'm out of here." And at that moment, I never went back to church. I barely went to the funeral. I went to the funeral in the back of the room, and I heard these words from some sick person in the room: "Well, he'll never be able to go to heaven." And when I took that one word from that one sick individual that happened to attend that funeral of somebody that we didn't even know, and I made my whole sole basis of my religious belief system and belief on God on that one word: he can't go to heaven. So I went home, and about 6 months later, I tried to hang myself in my room, and it didn't work, and I ran away. And I was off to the races drinking, and purposefully drinking like the book talks about. And I drank, and I drank, and I drank. And unfortunately, when you're only maybe 5'1" on a good day, and you drink like a guy, things aren't going well. I ended up in another city. I drank so much I would black out almost every time. And I mean, it's not an attractive thing to see a woman drink like a man. First off, it's not very pretty. Second off, I not only was vomiting and blacking out, but I'm ending up in different cities, like from Seattle to Texas, trying to get a restaurant, sleep in a restaurant one night, and people would feel sorry for me. They'd offer me a job for a couple of days. I'd be out of school for a month. Crazy things were happening to me. I'd end up making enough money to get a bus ticket to come home. I'd end up in people's cars, parked cars, sleeping in people's porches. I mean, I'd be so drunk and so out of control. I wake up in the front yard, of my family's, friends and stuff. I mean, it was just out of hand. And that's the way I drank. I could not control the way I drank. I'd start out one of those nights where I'd want to be a lady. I'd put on some fancy clothes and try to go downtown with my older friends. And you know what? I'd start out with an umbrella drink. Pretty soon I'm wearing the umbrella in my hair. And, it goes on to tell you that I just can't drink good. I just never have. And, it's funny now when I talk about it, but it wasn't funny then because I'm doing things I don't want to do, and I'm going to places I would never go. And pretty soon I'm beginning to mix things with other substances so I can stay awake and drink the way I like to drink. And I'll mention that only because I'm trying to do anything I can to continue to drink. And I'm the young kid that finally decides they're going to run away for good and all. And so I grab everything out of my house. I'm 14 years old, and I run away, and I live on the streets of Seattle. And I'm not going to do a fifth step, like I said, but by that point, I am beginning to do things I hope that your children never have to do. Not only to eat, but to continue to drink. And I began to sell myself out. And I don't mean that in a sexual way, I just mean that in a spiritual way. I began to go against every value and every moral that I had to continue to drink. And when you start doing things like that, only another drink stops those feelings. And we've all done that. We've all been prostitutes, let's be honest. And it doesn't have to have anything to do with sex. We do that, we sell ourselves out for another drink. We feel bad about the way in which we treated a family member or a spouse or a person in our life. And we begin to feel so bad about the thing that we did that only another drink helps. And that's what what I began to do. Pretty soon I couldn't even barely attend school. I graduated with honors at 16, but I could not show up anymore. I got a scholarship, and I was unable to even attend my first day at Stanford, and what an honor to be able to get into Stanford at 16, but I can't even show up my first day. So what do? I just tell everybody I didn't want to go to that tree-hugging school in California anyway. So, my ego is so big, but my self-esteem is so small that I have to make fun of everything because I couldn't make it, because I couldn't show up my first day. So my whole life is an ongoing set of chaos, of starting something and not being able to finish it, of starting in a new city, getting a new boyfriend, and he finds out how much I drink and he leaves me, getting a job, holding a job for a couple of weeks and ending up not being able to show up in the morning and losing that job and saying, oh, I didn't like that job anyway. My whole life was a string of starting overs. And, for me, it got so, unbearably painful. Then I'd be back, I'm going to go back to school, and that's what I need. I just need to go to school for a while, and I'll be fine, because I always had another solution for myself. I never looked to anyone else to get any help. I was king. I was going to save myself. So I'd go ahead and go back to school, and that would last maybe 6 or 8 months, and then I'd blow out of school again. And it was just an ongoing thing, trying to find some human aid to help my drinking. Some way, maybe this guy would help me. He'll just let me have 3 beers at night. He'll be able to, this guy, we'll get him to come and watch me drink 3 beers at night, and then he'll just dole them out to me. And that was no good. After 3 beers, I'm going to fight with you till you give me the rest of the 6-pack, and push come to shove. I would brawl with you to get the rest of it. And that's so ladylike and so lovely to be with, And that's the kind of personality I am, that I mean one thing, and I mean it with all my heart, that I don't want to be like that. I don't want to drink like that. I don't want to act like that. I really want to be a nice girl, and I want to have a nice boyfriend. Someday I want to get married and have kids and do all the right stuff and go to college and have a career, but I can't follow through with anything. So I begin to think I'm crazy. And being crazy is not so bad, because when you go to the psychiatrist, they listen. They listen intently to everything you say, and as long as you continue to say the lies that you've been telling yourself all these years, they start getting out the prescription pad. So I would get very excited. I don't know if anybody else in the room gets excited when they see a prescription pad, but I used to, because I was getting the effect produced before they even began to write, So they'd get out the prescription pad, and I would tell them my sad tale about how my father died of an alcoholic death. My mother burned on a couch, and I would retell the story of my terrible childhood, this way in which I had to live, and then I had to be a runaway, and then I had to drink alcohol, and it was always everybody else's fault. My whole life has been everybody else's fault. I mean, right now I'm feeling like me being here is it's Monica's fault, So, pretty much. And I just got so used to it always being someone else's fault. So. And pretty soon, and I noticed the psychiatrist is actually getting teared up a little bit, And it's the truth that, and then they began to diagnose me, things like, well, are you having a hard time sleeping? Well, of course I am. I haven't slept in days. They don't know I'm taking something that's been keeping me awake for 5 days, but they don't ask those questions, or I don't tell them the truth. So they begin to diagnose me things that I'm certainly not. I've never been tripolar or whatever they call you nowadays. I was never those other things. I was never bipolar. I was never, didn't have a schizoid disorder. I didn't have a, borderline personality. I never have had any of those other things that, they tried to label me with. The problem was I was an alcoholic and I was untreated. And I didn't want to look at the truth. I didn't want to see the fact that if I could put the drink down, I had a chance. There was a way out, but I was unwilling to even begin to put the drink down. And that was the truth. It was always somebody else's fault for poor Susie and her problems. Pour me another drink, poor Susie. And so, I began to just, go from one place to another. And I think in 6 years I lived in 17 different addresses and start overs. And that's a lot of geographical cures. And it got to a point where, this wonderful man of my dreams that I was living with, chasing him around the country, literally chasing him around the country, because, he was going to marry me someday, I knew it. And, you know how that is. So, of course, he married somebody later, 6 months after he left me. I don't know how that worked, but, the thing is about this man is I I had an idea in my head that someday, somehow, that was going to work out. And I was always one of those progressive thinkers that, just somebody with potential, I was always going for potential with somebody, I never was dating anybody that was good now, but they had potential, I was always a positive thinker when it came to dating, and the problem was, I didn't have any potential because I was killing myself, and I didn't realize that. And finally, within about another year, he choked me one day for, I think, a beer or something, and I was so distraught, and his brother his brother was crazy. He's walking around the house all the time. Oh, I'm an alcoholic. I'm sober. I love my life. And I thought, oh, what a moron. Who would even admit that they're sober? Who would walk around the house all happy because they're sober? And so one day his brother Dennis comes up to me and says, "You're worth saving." And I was like, oh, get away from me. And, I thought, what a weird guy, And that day that I got choked, something connected. And I thought, I'm going to call that weird brother Dennis and find out what he's talking about. Maybe I'll go to one of those religious meetings of his, I need help. I just got choked, I need help. So I called up Brother Dennis, and Dennis came rushing over in his nice clean car with nice clean clothes, and I've been saved, he's like, oh, and I thought for sure he'd gone to some religious place. I thought he was going to shave my head and shake a tambourine. I didn't know what to expect. And he took me to an AA meeting, and these people were very nice, and they talked about their lives, and that something had changed in them, and they were happy and free, and did I want what they had? And all these women came racing up after the meeting, and I was like up against the wall, terrified. Women, I don't like women. They take your boyfriend money or your clothes. I didn't like them, and they just were too much. And, and then they said, why don't you come to a meeting every day? And I was like, I can't believe your life is so lame. When you finally get to AA, all you have left to do is go to a meeting every day. If I ever get that bad, it's just over. If I ever get that bad, I'll come where you are. But come on, your life is so bad you have to go to AA every day? Lord God. And then they told me to get a book, and I said, why would I buy it when you read it here? Come on. So I left. I left that night. I never even attempted anything. I just was like, whew. Okay, I thought, getting choked is nothing. My life is good. Those poor people, poor people, and I, no ego or anything there, I was fine. But meanwhile, I'm street scamming, at 6th and Pine every day to get money for alcohol and other fun, substances. But I'm fine. I'm good. I don't need your help. Because, and I don't believe anything called denial. I believe that I just simply was not willing to start a different way of seeing things. I wasn't willing to look at your life and say, maybe I got a problem. I still wanted to drink. Truth of the matter is, bottom line, I was not done. That's the truth. You can call it anything you wanted. I did not want what you people had. So I immediately made fun of you. I immediately found what was different. I immediately said, you're a little nutty. I'm okay. And it was such a lie. Bold-faced lie. I'm the one with marks on my neck. I'm the one living off of other people's kindness, lying, cheating, and scamming. You people are working, living right, living by God's standards, and I have no God. In the book on page, 60, it talks about, what it was like, what happened, and what we're like today. What it was like, I'm telling you about what it was like without God. And now I'm going to tell you what happened when God entered my life. And what happened to me is I was so ill at that point, being strangled. That didn't even faze me. So it took another 2 years of being beat into a state of reasonableness. And what I know today, that nothing brought me to stop drinking. No jail sentence did it. I got alcohol poisoning, didn't do it. Going to the hospital, having my stomach pumped. I don't have sufficient force of the memory like it talks about on page 24. I cannot remember strongly enough that I just was in the hospital 3 hours ago. I drank that night. That same night, I drank again. Because I don't remember that happened to me. And not because I'm an idiot, not because my brain isn't clear. I know what happened to me 3 hours before that. Because I don't care. Because I want to drink still. Because I'm not done. Because I cannot recall it with sufficient force, because I have no perspective. And that continued to happen to me. And finally, it was like, there's nothing that will scare me. We've heard that line before. Nothing will scare an alcoholic. Nothing will get an alcoholic sober. No jail sentence did it. Nothing from my family. Don't come again. Don't come Thanksgiving. Don't show at our house. Get out of the driveway. Stop calling us. People coming to my house saying you're scary. Stay away from us. Didn't matter. Nothing worked. Nothing stopped me. For a short period of time, I'd clean myself up for a little bit, but nothing will stop us. And it wasn't until I was so ill one day, I was sitting in a flop house, and I'd been up for 5 days. And I was looking out the window, and there was this family next to us in this trailer. And I'm living without running water in a flop house, and there's bottles of Old English all over the floor in an old pizza box. And this couple is sitting next door to me, and it's like 6 o'clock in the morning, and the man's like giving his wife a kiss good morning, and they have this beat up little old trailer and a baby, and you could just see they're just happy. They're just happy to be alive. And the man is kissing his wife, and and the little baby's like, hi, and and I'm thinking to myself, what is wrong with me? Why can't I have that? Nothing is ever right in my life. There's never anything's enough. No man is good enough. There's no amount of alcohol is enough. Everything's about, I have to have more money, more of everything. Nothing was ever good enough for me. And when I saw that picture of that family, it was like, I wanted that. And I just said, dear God, help me. Just help me. And it couldn't have been but 15 or 20 minutes later, I heard this voice. And I'm thinking, great, now I'm hearing voices. I'm going to have to go see the psychiatrist, And there was no one behind me. And back in 1987, when I got sober, I picked up the phone. I heard this voice say, pick up the phone. And I picked up the phone, and I dialed 0. And I just started to talk to the operator. And I said, lady, I'm a drunk. I need help. I've got an abscess on my arm. I'm sick. I'm going to die. And she said, wait, honey, just talk to me. Just talk to me. And I don't know how long I talked to her, but I wasn't an idiot. I knew what she was doing. She was going to call the police. I knew what she was going to do. And I wanted to put the phone down, but there was a part of me that just kept talking. I just wanted to be done. And I just let it go. I just kept talking to her. And finally, I just put the phone down, and I knew they were coming. And there was probably enough in the carpet to go to prison. And I thought to myself, that's okay. I'll be done. I'm ready. I'll go to jail. At least it'll all stop. Today it'll stop. So I sat there and I'm waiting for the police, and I thought, well, I better tell the rest of the people in the house. The cops are coming. Out burst the guy out the door, and my boyfriend leaves with the drug dealer. My 11-year boyfriend out the door, the one that I've been chasing all over the country that was going to marry me. He leaves with the drug dealer, the girl. And I knew at that moment I was alone. It was just me, and it was God. Because somebody called in, and it was this man. He said, my name is Ron. I'm with King County Detox. Does somebody want some help? And I said, yes, sir, I do. And he said, you get your butt down here by 9 a.m., and we'll talk. And he put me in a bed. And they did a Baker Act. I guess that's what they do in this state, but back there in Seattle, it's something else they call it. But I was physically unable to get out of there for 72 hours. And they didn't have treatment for 2 weeks for me, so I waited. And I had nowhere to go, so a woman I knew in Seattle, she let me stay in her garage. So I slept outside in a garage for 2 weeks while I waited for treatment. And every day, an AA woman came and picked me up and took me to a meeting, and she would accidentally be like, oh, I forgot my husband wouldn't eat a sandwich at lunch. Do you want it? And she'd always have something. Oh, I have an extra bowl of soup. You don't want it, do you? She was just the kindest woman, and she'd bring me something every day and take me to a meeting, and another woman would take me at night. And I did that for 2 weeks, and then I went to treatment for 20 days. And when I got out, I went to my first AA meeting on the outside, and I saw this woman. I went right up to her because they told you in treatment, get a sponsor. And I went to this woman. She had 2 other women standing next to her, and I looked at her. I'm sure she could see deer in the headlights, And I was like, I need it. And she goes, do you need a sponsor? And I said, yes, ma'am. And she goes, come on in with me. And the other 2 women went in the other room, and the AA meeting was about ready to start. And I thought, aren't we going in the meeting, She said, no, we're going in here. And she sat down and she asked me, I got a couple questions for you before we go to the meeting. She goes, are you done for good and all? Have you had enough? And I said, yeah, ma'am, I've had enough. She said, are you willing to believe in God? I said, yes, I am. She said, okay, then are you ready to go to any lengths in Alcoholics Anonymous to stay sober? I said, sure, I can do that. She said, then I guess I'll be your sponsor. Come on, let's go to a meeting then. She got up and her friends and we all went into the meeting. And that was the beginning of a wonderful relationship. Her name was Cheryl. And you know, she wasn't easy in the sense that I never knew what she was going to do. I mean, she'd pull a fast one all the time. Like she'd come by I was living in a recovery house and she'd just come by in a car. I mean, like in the old days, those tail cars from the 50s. She had an old car. She loved old vintage things. And she'd come by in one of those cars and out, you know, the doors would open up and smoke would billow out, you know. And like an old guy in the back would be there and two other people. And she'd say, okay, people with the most sobriety sit in the front. So you're all the way in the back, you know. So she'd put me in the back seat in between two people that I didn't know, you know. And I didn't know if we were going out to dinner, if we were going to go cut somebody's lawn. I never knew where we were going. And she'd say, stand on the porch. And I'd be like, stand on the porch for how long? She'd say, stop asking questions. And I'd be like, well, should I bring a coat? Don't worry, just bring a coat anyway. Stop asking questions. And I'd be like, well, why can't I stop asking questions? And the reason is because I always had to know everything about everything right now. And half my reason I could never believe in God was because I needed to know everything right now. I wanted God to tell me what was going to happen next. And so when I had wanted and needed God bad enough, God appeared in the form of Alcoholics Anonymous and a sponsor. God had appeared in the form of an operator and a crazy guy calling about a treatment bed. God had appeared in these people in the back of a car billowing smoke out and taking me on my first 12-step call. I'll never forget, we were sitting around and there was this really sick woman and she'd been drinking alcoholically and there'd been bottles everywhere and some were still half full. And there was another newcomer with me and my sponsor said, you two, go dump all the bottles. And I'm thinking, geez, Louise, I need to get a better sponsor than her. She's not very bright. I could drink this stuff. And I'm telling that to the newcomer. And all of a sudden I feel this thing on the back of my neck, you know. And she says to me, what are you saying? What are you saying? And I'm like, nothing. And she said, I heard you. That I don't trust it. I know you're not going to drink that because if you drink that, you're going to be drunk and you're going to ruin your sobriety. But in the meantime, I want you to smell the way in which you used to smell. That's why I had you dump that alcohol out. Oh, okay. That's a good idea. So we used to dump all the alcohol out on the 12-step calls. It was a really good idea because you know what? To this day, I mean, I can smell alcohol within like a 30-mile radius now. I'm not kidding you. I mean, my stomach is so sick from the smell of alcohol, of dumping people's alcohol out on all those 12-step calls. It was a beautiful thing. I got so sick from the smell of alcohol. It was a beautiful idea. She wasn't an idiot. She was watching us real close. But I was so smart and so brilliant. I knew everything, you know? I'm sure none of you were like that. But, you know, and then, you know, little things like, you know, we'd be a call, you know, in another place, and then the place would be just filthy, like a rat's nest, you know? And I'd be like, oh, for God's sakes, I don't even want to be here. It makes my skin crawl. And my sponsor would be like, why don't you start picking up here? And I'd be like, hey, this is not AA. I'm not a maid. You know, I don't get paid $10 an hour to clean. You know, that's what I get on the street. I get $10 an hour to clean it. You know, I'm telling that to the newcomer. My sponsor would be like, oh, so you're so proud that you get paid to clean up. Well, you remember you're in AA and you're going to go willing to go to any length. Didn't you mention that at some point that you'd go to any length to stay sober? And I'd be like, this is how you used to live in the filth you used to live. I don't want you to ever forget the filth. And when this woman comes back from detox, won't it be nice that she has a nice clean place to live? Won't it be wonderful there's no more bottles and it won't be filthy? Won't that be wonderful when her children bring her home? It'll be a nice clean place to live. And I'll be like, God, I'd feel like such a loser when I'd say stuff like that. You know, and my mouth, I mean, literally I'd want to like insert foot in mouth. I want to click my mouth. And you know, for so many years my sponsor would catch me, but she never made me feel bad about that. She just showed me with love that, you know what, I was so negative and so difficult, but she loved me through that difficulty because I had always been negative. The glass was always half empty in my world. It had always been that way, you know, and as we began to work the steps, something funny was going on. It'd been like 70 days into my sobriety, you know, and she says, you know, have you noticed you haven't been complaining about wanting to drink? And I was like, well, as a matter of fact, don't jinx it. Don't jinx it. You know? And she said, do you really think you can jinx God? Do you really think you got that power, Susie? And it was so powerful, some of the things that she would say to us. You know, and she was always taking us to other meetings. She'd put us all in the car and drive us to different places. She didn't have a lot of money, but money always appeared when we needed to go somewhere. It was just magic. Like one summer we went on a road trip to Montana to do a four-step a four-step conference. And, I didn't have any money to go, and I knew I wasn't. There was no way I was going to go. And this old guy, he says, "Can you ride a bike?" And I was like, "Can I ride a bike? Of course I can ride on the back of a Harley. I mean, come on, look at me. I've been on plenty of bikes, And he said, "I didn't ask that, And so, it was just little things like that. And he said, "Well, then get on the back of my bike." And I was like, I didn't want to ride on the bike with some old dude. I wanted to go with some young guy, So suddenly my whole ideal for the summer had been ruined, But what was so wonderful is I got on the back of the bike with that old guy. And you know what? He'd been sober for 30 years. He taught me more than I could have ever asked to be taught. And just because I was a little bit open-minded, not really, but God got me open-minded enough to spend that summer going all across the country like that, amazing things happened to me. My sobriety was so heightened. I learned so much that summer. And all it took was me to get out of my own way. Half the battle is me and my own mouth and my own... Right here is a bad neighborhood, right about here. Stay out of here. Because I'm always thinking. It's my problem. I'm just always thinking about me. Me, 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 me. It's my favorite song. I'm always thinking about me, how everything's going to affect me, what's going to happen to me, where will I go, what shall I do? It's not good enough for me. And like that same thing about seeing that family that day, that was the beginning of me saying, enough. Can I be happy with enough? When am I going to start being happy with just what I have now? And so my sponsor was teaching me how to be happy with what I have now. And that's been one of the greatest gifts of the gratitude of like these promises that we get. Like it's like God has given us a carrot every time we would work a step. There's all these promises throughout the book, And as we learn the principles for each step, we get these little carrots to get us through, And my sponsor was so good to show me that, the way in which the book was written, Dr. Bob and Bill, they kind of knew that, I lose my attention span like, shiny things, you know what I mean? I lose my attention quickly, and then I need a pat on the back or wherever. I need a pat somewhere to keep me going. And, those promises would help me to see that not only was my life getting better, but this program was working, that it was actually changing me. Little things were happening, and I remember, it said abandon myself to the care and protection of a loving God. That was like this huge mouthpiece. I was like, okay, let's back up here. I'm good with their whole GOD group of drunks. I can do that. And that whole general creator of the universe, fine, but let's not get all this personal, oh, God's in the kitchen with me, and Jesus this, and Jesus, I couldn't, that was a little much for me. So my sponsor said to me, no, wait a minute. Let me see. You've abandoned yourself to the protection and care of that young man for 11 years. And you abandon yourself to the care and protection of alcohol for 14 years, but you can't abandon yourself to the care and protection of a power that you've yet to meet that's managed to keep you sober for the last 71 days? And it made me begin to think, oh, yeah, maybe I could try. It wasn't such a big jump at that point, that maybe I'd already been doing that all along by just joining AA. And that maybe by just working the first step of realizing that I was powerless over alcohol and my life was unmanageable, and the fact that I was willing to believe in anything at all was a beginning, and that I was abandoning myself to that loving entity that was keeping me sober already. I was already at 3. And now all I had to do was do what they said on the bottom of the page. Next, we launched in a vigorous course of action. That was all I had to do was jump. And so I took that jump and I began the 4th step, and amazing things happened. That was the first time I unburied God. I had no idea I had single-handedly buried my God. That's where he went. I thought I just kind of like ignored him. I thought I just was mad at him. Now I'd buried him. All those values and morals that I'd gone against, all the things that I was so ashamed of, all the stuff that I had done to other people, I'd buried them. And it just took some time to uncover that. And when I walked out of there with my 5th step, I didn't just like come out and go, whoo, clean, beautiful Susie. That wasn't how it was. I was numb for the first day or so. I almost felt sick, physically sick, because I had told so much. I'd never been that honest in my life. But something else began to happen. I felt a part of AA. I knew that this was the most powerful program I'd ever seen. I'd never seen anything beat my alcoholism to this point. I'd never stayed sober that many days. By now, I must have had at least 50, 60, 70, 80 days probably sober. It was miraculous to me, to be sober that long, almost 90 days. So something was changing in me, and I began to have faith that there was a way out and that this was going to work somehow. And more, that sponsor of mine was driving me all over Canada practically, literally. AA, and there really was AA up in AA. And I mean, from Seattle, we were going to Canada, And me and my friend got lost up there, and these people, our car broke down, had one of those stories, like, oh, I can't find the AA meeting, we don't know what to do. And these people from AA literally drove us all the way back to the border. I mean, I got story after story after story from people in AA. So my faith just began to get rocketed into a spiritual dimension. And that's when I began to understand what that fourth dimension was. That thing used to scare me. I don't want to be in a fourth dimension. I don't know if I like that idea. What I understood was that it was a spiritual dimension, that I didn't have to live in this material world and worry about how far of a job am I going to get? What am I going to be better than somebody else? Am I going to do better than my family? Is my mom going to think I did a good enough job in college? And it's not living this material world and seeing how much money I got in the bank and everything like that. It was about changing who I was. And so once I let God in, crazy little things were happening. I was starting to think about other people, like the people at my meetings. Little things were happening. I could tell when somebody didn't have any money and she didn't have any money in the basket, and like little crazy things were happening. It was like I knew she was hungry and we'd all go out to eat and she just keeps, no, I don't want anything to eat. Of course she wanted something to eat. It was dinner time. So I was working and I was, little things I'd be able to, I'd split a muffin with her. I couldn't buy her a muffin, but I'd split a muffin with her. Just little small things began to change in me. It was just so, I never split muffins with people. Little things began to change in me that were so different, that were so not me. And I began to think about my family and the idea that, I really did want my family back in my life somehow, someday, if that was ever possible. And, the amends my sponsor was starting to talk about, they were a little scary. And she said, we're going to do one easy one, one medium one, and then we're going to do a real serious one. And that's so you won't shrink at anything. And so the little one, was just a friend. And the medium one was a financial one. And I was like, wait a minute. I'm not barely even working. I'm just working part-time for a caterer. And she said, financial amends need to start immediately. So if you bring in $10, we'll take 2 of your 10 and we'll start from there. And I was like, oh, hey. I had this idea that, well, let me save up to make amends. And my sponsor said, if you ever saved up, you'd never save up enough to start making amends. You'll never do it. And I really realized that she was probably one of the smartest women I'd ever met, because she knew me and I knew myself that there'd never be enough money to make amends, because I need a lot. Let's face it, I like them all. No, I'm just kidding. But, there'd always be a reason to shop, or there'd always be a reason to take a trip, or there'd always be something else that I want to buy. And I'd never really get there and do those amends. I just wouldn't. And I needed somebody that said, no, let's get the envelopes out. $2 a week here, $5 for your rent, $10 for this, $15 for that. And I learned the envelope method, and it worked very well. And that's how I made my amends, my first round of amends. And my mother was my first hardest amends. I wrote her a letter. She lived in Arizona. I lived in Seattle. I got the letter back. Very painful. And then my sponsor made me read in the book where it says that some people will kick you out of the office. Some people will not accept your amends. And that happens sometimes, but you go on. You continue to live by the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous. So my sponsor had me, after about 6 months, resend another letter to her. It came back. And then after another couple of months, I started sending cards to my mother about what I was doing. She started taking the cards. And over a period of years, I began to write every month, send pictures. Then I got married and I invited her to my wedding. My mother attended my wedding. Started to have a relationship with her, and then I had a son. And over time, that relationship started to bond. My mom got, she became, kind of independent in my life a little bit. Little things happened. She continued to drink all these years. Every day I prayed that my mom someday, if it was possible, she could get sober. I really wanted to have a sober mom. I was really focused on that. My sponsor said, you need to love her regardless if she ever stops drinking. And if you can't, then your motive's wrong. And so I prayed for God to lift the motive. And I just began to pray to have a relationship with her as she was. And something happened, and one day she got sick and she went in the hospital and they detoxed her. My mother had a vision. She never drank again. And she never went to AA, and she never made amends to me. But we began to have an amazing relationship. And I had this crazy thing. We were all planning to go, my husband, my son, and I, we were all planning to go to Disneyland. And I had this sick feeling in my stomach. An intuitive thought occurred to me that I better go see my mother. And my husband said, what do you mean we're not going to Disney World? And I said, we're not going, we're going to Arizona. And I went to go see my mother, and my son got to see her for a week. And 6 months later, my mother dropped dead of a heart attack. And so I'm so grateful to say I was able to give the eulogy at my mother's funeral and meet it and love her. It's a powerful, powerful example of Alcoholics Anonymous. But what I want to say is more than that, just that one little amends, is that God gave me the ability to have that intuitive thought from reading 86 to 88 every day. I certainly didn't just, oh, I'm so spiritual, I got that thought. That didn't happen that way. It's from people that showed me what to read in the literature, people that taught me how to kneel every day at my bedside and ask God, how can I be of service today? Who can I help? What can I do? You know, as I began to work the rest of the steps, in step 10, I do a nightly 10-step, believe it or not. Sometimes it's on paper, sometimes it's just oral, but I do that at night. Step 11, I began to find a God of my understanding, and I went back to my church. And you know what? I'm Catholic, and I'm not a recovering Catholic, because you can't recover from something that isn't an illness. So I just wanted to clarify that. I went back to church, and I found out that I liked my church. And I found out that, you know what? Just like Alcoholics Anonymous, we find a place where we're comfortable and we believe what we believe, and that works for us. And so it may not work for someone else, but it's worked for me for a really long time, and I like my faith. And I'm really grateful to have AA and my faith alongside each other. They've worked really well for a very long time. I went back to college, and you know, who knew? I could stay in college, and I got straight A's. And the greatest gift is I got to go work with kids that were kids like me that ran away from home and that were hanging themselves in the bedroom. That's who I got to used to work with. And I used to work chemical dependency and work with them and put them back in the home. What a gift. God let me do that full circle again. I retired here in the last, 8 or 10 years. And, I've been given a really great life. I got married first, dated with my clothes on. Who knew? Was that weird, huh? That's an odd experience. I let somebody actually court me and talk to me and do all that kind of crazy stuff and pay for my dinner and all that stuff. He didn't know what he was in for, let me tell you. And then I had a son after getting married. There's a new experience. And then, you know what? And my son, I brought him up in a faith. And I brought him up in a principled home of Alcoholics Anonymous. He came to all the AA functions. He knew about AA. He watched in our home people coming in and receiving the message. He saw his mother working with hundreds of alcoholics on a daily basis in and out of his home. He saw that. He saw the gift of giving to others. My son was, doing coat drives when he was 12 years old. He's just graduating May 21st from Johns Hopkins on a scholarship. He's a great kid, and he's going to be a doctor. I mean, today I'm very blessed to have an amazing life because of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I don't drive, some new Fiat. I don't have some handsome husband that's a doctor or anything. But what I have today is a peace of mind. I don't owe anybody anymore. I didn't cheat on anybody. I have a host of friends all across the country. I am somebody that, when I go to sleep at night, I close my eyes and I smile. I have a God that lays next to me in my bed that just puts his arms around me and holds me so tightly. I started every day with, these kneeling prayers and end my night thanking God. And I used to write these letters. Dear God, it's Susie. I don't know you. I don't know what you're trying to pull, but I don't get it. And that's how I started writing to God. And over the years, they changed to, Dear God, I want to know you. Please help me to find you. And then the final letters began to be, Dear God, I love you. Thank you so much for this beautiful day. I need you. I'm hurting. And they just kept changing over time. I have volumes of God letters all over my house. And I'm so grateful to be here today, and thank you for letting me come.